I always thought love was supposed to be warm, gentle, something that wrapped around your heart like sunlight on a cold day. But with Adrian, love was sharp edges, shadows and silence that screamed louder than words ever could. My name is Elena Whitmore, or rather, Elena Whitmore Reinhardt, since I married into the Reinhardt family 2 years ago. On paper, I should have been the luckiest woman alive. Adrian Reinhardt, my husband, was every woman's dream. Tall, handsome, a business empire at his fingertips, charisma that commanded every room he entered. But I, his wife, knew the truth. Behind the glittering image, Adrian's heart didn't belong to me. It belonged entirely unapologetically to his mistress, Selene. Even now, I could hear their laughter echoing in the hall. It was my birthday, my 26th. I sat alone in the dining room of our sprawling mansion, a table set with candles, a cake ordered by the staff, and a hollow seat across from mine that should have been filled by my husband. Instead, he was in the garden, celebrating with her. A bitter laugh caught in my throat. Of course he was. I stared at the untouched cake in front of me, its sugar flowers mocking me. The staff had long since retreated, trained well to pretend not to notice the humiliation of their mistress. My hand shook slightly as I picked up the knife and cut myself a slice. Happy birthday to me. I remembered the night we married. The vows I had spoken with trembling lips, eyes filled with hope. He had looked at me with a gaze so unreadable that I thought perhaps he was just shy. Perhaps his heart needed time. Little did I know, his heart had already been spoken for. Why her? I had once asked him, the night I found him returning late with Selene's perfume clinging to his suit. He hadn't even flinched. Because she's who I love, Elena. You were convenient. Don't demand what I can't give. Convenient. The word had sliced through me like a blade. Tonight, though, something inside me shifted. I was tired of waiting for scraps. Tired of being invisible in my own marriage. I pushed the cake away and stood, my silk dress rustling faintly as I walked to the balcony. From there I could see them, Adrian and Selene, laughing like they belonged in another world. She was perched on the edge of the fountain, her hand resting possessively on his arm. He leaned down, whispering something that made her throw her head back in laughter. My chest ached, but for the first time, the ache didn't bring tears. It brought clarity. Enough, I whispered into the night air. I had been foolish to think I could love enough for both of us. Love, I was beginning to realize, should never be one-sided chains. The memory of my mother's voice drifted back to me as if summoned from the grave. Elena, don't lose yourself for a man who doesn't see you. The right man won't make you beg for his love. But what if the right man didn't exist? What if love was just another story we told ourselves to survive the emptiness? Mrs. Reinhardt, a soft voice pulled me back. It was Marjorie, the housekeeper. She had been with the Reinhardts for decades, more of a family figure than any of them deserved. Her eyes were full of pity as she took in the untouched table. Do you want me to put the cake away? I nodded stiffly. Yes, thank you. As she turned to leave, she hesitated. You deserve better, dear. The words made my throat tighten, but I said nothing. Better wasn't an option. Or so I thought. That night, I slipped into our bedroom long after Adrian returned. He smelled of her again. Always her. I lay stiffly on my side, staring at the moonlight streaming across the floor, while he slipped into bed without a word. The silence between us was suffocating, louder than any fight. Days passed like that, each one blending into the next. His cruelty wasn't in blows or shouting, it was in indifference. In the way he dismissed me like a piece of furniture. In the way Selene walked into our home as if she belonged there, while I, the legal wife, was treated as the intruder. The breaking point came a week later. I had fallen ill. A fever that burned so hot I could barely stand. I called Adrian, begged him to come home. My voice cracked as I whispered into the phone, "Please, I need you. Just this once." There was a pause on the other end. Then his cold reply, "I can't. Selene needs me tonight." Click. The line went dead, tears-soaked. My pillow as I curled into myself, the fever consuming me. That night, I realized the cruel truth. I could collapse. I could die and he wouldn't notice. He wouldn't care. It was Damon who found me. Damon Reinhardt, Adrian's younger brother. The family's disappointment. While Adrian was the golden heir, Damon was the black sheep. Careless, reckless, a man who lived life with no plan. He drank too much, partied too much, and smiled too easily. But that night, when he walked into my room by chance, his careless smile vanished. "Jesus, Elena, you're burning up," he muttered, rushing to my side. His hands, warm but surprisingly gentle, pressed against my forehead. "Where the hell is Adrian?" I laughed weakly. With her. The anger that flashed in Damon's eyes startled me. Unbelievable. "Come on." Without hesitation, he scooped me into his arms. For a man everyone called careless, he held me with more care than Adrian ever had. He drove me to the hospital himself, his jaw clenched, his usual playfulness gone. I drifted in and out of consciousness, but one thing seared into my mind: the look on his face when he thought I wouldn't wake. Not careless at all. Desperate. Protective. When I opened my eyes hours later, Damon was slumped in the chair beside my bed, his hair messy, his head bowed, as if he'd stayed awake all night just to make sure I was still breathing. Something shifted inside me again. The man the world dismissed as careless had done what my own husband never had. He had cared, and that was the beginning, the first fragile thread of a path I never expected to walk. Because sometimes the ones we least expect are the ones who change everything. When I was discharged from the hospital 2 days later, the first thing I noticed wasn't the sterile brightness of the white halls, or the way my legs trembled when I stood. It was Damon. He was waiting in the corner, slouched in the chair like a man who didn't belong in a place so serious. His shirt was rumpled, his hair an untamed mess, and yet his eyes, the moment they found me, softened in a way that felt startling. "You're awake," he said, standing quickly. His voice was hoarse, as if he hadn't slept. "How do you feel?" I hesitated. No one had asked me that in so long. Not Adrian. Not anyone. "Alive," I whispered. Damon let out a laugh, short, relieved, shaky. "That's a start." The nurse handed me a stack of discharge papers. I thanked her quietly, then turned to Damon. "You didn't have to stay." His expression shifted, somewhere between disbelief and frustration. What was I supposed to do? Leave you here alone? "You had a fever so high I thought." He stopped himself, running a hand through his hair. "Never mind. Just don't say I didn't have to." Because I did. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. Damon Reinhardt was supposed to be careless. He was supposed to be the brother who never took anything seriously. Yet here he was, looking at me like my existence mattered. I too was disarming. He walked me to the car, his hand steady at my elbow, as if afraid I might collapse. Outside, the early morning light painted the city in hues of pale gold, but to me, It all felt unreal. As we drove, I finally asked, "Does he know?" Damon's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "Adrian, yes, he knows." The bitterness in his voice was sharp. "I called him. Told him you were burning with fever, that you needed him. You know what he said." "I didn't want to, but I asked anyway." "What? She'll be fine." "Don't exaggerate, Damon." Damon's jaw clenched. And then he hung up. Probably went right back to Selene. The words stuck, though they didn't surprise me. It was confirmation of what I already knew. Adrian had chosen her, over and over again. Even when my life hung by a thread, I turned my face toward the window, swallowing hard. "That sounds like him." The silence between us was heavy. Damon drummed his fingers against the wheel, then finally muttered, "I don't know how you've lived with him this long." My lips curved in a humorless smile. "Neither do I." We didn't speak again until we reached the mansion. Damon parked the car and turned to me, his eyes uncharacteristically serious. "Elena," he said quietly, "you deserve better than him." The words nearly broke me. Not because they were untrue, but because no one had ever said them out loud before. I swallowed the lump in my throat and forced a small nod. "Thank you." When I stepped into the house, I expected to be greeted by silence. But Adrian was there, sitting in the grand living room, like a king on his throne. His expression was unreadable as his gaze flicked from me to Damon. "You're back," he said flatly, as though I'd merely stepped out for groceries. I stood frozen for a moment, then forced myself to walk past him. "Yes. The hospital discharged me this morning." His eyes narrowed slightly. "Damon took you?" "Yes," I replied, my tone clipped. Something flickered across his face, annoyance. Jealousy? I couldn't be sure. He leaned back in his chair, his voice cool. "You could have called me." A laugh bubbled in my throat, bitter and sharp. I turned to him slowly. "I did. Do you remember? You told me Selene needed you." The silence that followed was deafening. Adrian's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. It was Damon who broke the tension. "If I hadn't been there, Elena could've died," he snapped, his usual playful drawl replaced with steel. "But you wouldn't care about that, would you, brother?" "Enough," Adrian bit out. His voice was sharp, commanding, the same tone he used in boardrooms. He rose from his chair, his height casting a shadow over me. "This is between my wife and me." I met his gaze, and for the first time, I didn't lower mine. "Is it?" I asked softly. "Because it feels like everything between us has always been between you and Selene." Adrian froze. For a fleeting second, something raw flickered in his eyes, but then it was gone, replaced by cold indifference. Without another word, I turned and walked upstairs. My legs trembled with each step, but not from weakness this time, from resolve. That night, I lay awake in bed while Adrian stayed out late again. I didn't bother asking where he was. I already knew. Instead, my mind replayed Damon's words. "You deserve better than him." Did I? It felt dangerous, that thought. Dangerous, because for so long I had convinced myself that enduring Adrian's cruelty was the price of being his wife. That I had to stay, because leaving would mean failure. But what if staying was the real failure? The next morning, I found Damon in the garden, tossing a ball for the Reinhardt family's golden retriever. His tie was crooked, his shirt half untucked. But his smile when he saw me was genuine. "Hey, sunshine," he greeted, as though we hadn't shared such heavy words the day before. I couldn't help but smile faintly. "Sunshine, you've been through hell," he said lightly, "but you're still here. That makes you sunshine in my book." The warmth of his words seeped into me, chasing away the lingering chill of Adrian's indifference. Maybe Damon was careless. Maybe he was reckless. But in that moment, he was more real, more alive than anyone else in my world, and maybe, just maybe, he was the first crack in the walls I had built around my broken heart. When you've lived in shadows long enough, even the smallest flicker of light feels blinding. That was how Damon's presence began to feel to me. Not a blazing sun that demanded worship, but a steady warmth that crept in when I least expected it. The mansion felt different with him around. Damon had never cared for the stiff formality Adrian demanded of everyone. He laughed too loudly, left half-finished coffee cups on marble tables, tracked mud across pristine floors. To the Reinhardt elders, he was chaos incarnate. To me, he was a reminder that life didn't have to be so suffocating. I found myself watching him more often. The way his careless smile didn't quite reach his eyes. The way he lingered outside my door some nights, as though debating whether to check on me. The way he was patient when I faltered climbing the stairs, his hand hovering just close enough to catch me without making me feel fragile. It unsettled me, because I was still Adrian's wife, and Damon was still his brother. One evening I was curled on the couch with a book when Damon strolled in, carrying a tray of mismatched snacks, popcorn in a silver bowl, chocolate bars, and even a glass of orange juice balanced precariously. "What is this?" I asked, startled. He dropped onto the armchair across from me, grinning. "A peace offering. For what?" "For existing in this house. I figured it's hell enough with Adrian around, so the least I can do is provide snacks." Despite myself, I laughed. It burst out of me, small and awkward, but real. And Damon's grin softened into something less careless, more intent. "That's better," he murmured. "You should laugh more, Elena." My heart stumbled. I quickly looked down at my book. "You shouldn't say things like that." "Why not?" "Because." My throat tightened. "Because you're his brother." For once, Damon didn't joke. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "You think I don't know that? You think I don't know the lines I'm not supposed to cross?" I met his gaze, and what I saw there startled me. Not recklessness, not teasing. Something heavier, deeper. I closed the book with trembling hands. "Then don't cross them." Silence stretched between us, thick and unspoken. Finally, Damon leaned back with a sigh, forcing a smirk back onto his face. "Fine, but I'm still stealing the popcorn." He reached for the bowl, and I exhaled shakily, pretending my heart wasn't pounding. But what unnerved me more than Damon's words was the way Adrian reacted the next day. It was at breakfast. I was buttering a piece of toast when Adrian strode in, Selene practically draped on his arm. My appetite vanished instantly. She smirked at me, as always, like a cat toying with prey. Adrian sat across from me, his expression unreadable. Then, casually, his eyes flicked toward Damon, who was scrolling through his phone at the other end of the table. "You've been spending a lot of time with my wife lately," Adrian remarked, his tone deceptively mild. Damon didn't look up. "Someone has to." The words landed like a blade. Selene stiffened, glancing nervously at Adrian. Adrian's jaw ticked. "Careful, brother. Don't forget your place." Damon finally set his phone down, meeting Adrian's icy stare without flinching. "Funny. I could say the same to you." The air crackled with tension. For a moment, I thought Adrian might strike him. But then he smiled, a smile colder than winter. "Don't mistake my patience for weakness," Adrian said smoothly. "Elena is my wife. You'd do well to remember that." I sat frozen, my heart pounding in my chest. He had never cared before. Not when I was sick, not when I cried myself to sleep. Yet now the mere suggestion of Damon's attention was enough to make him bristle like a cornered beast. It wasn't love. It was possession. That realization both chilled and liberated me. Later that day, as I walked in the garden, Damon found me again. He kicked at the gravel, looking uncharacteristically restless. "You okay?" he asked. I hesitated, then nodded. "I just don't understand him." Damon let out a humorless laugh. "Don't try to. Adrian doesn't want to be understood. He just wants control." "Control?" I echoed softly. Damon glanced at me, his expression unusually serious. "Elena, one day, you're going to have to decide if you want to keep living under his control, or if you want to live at all." The words lodged deep in my chest, because I knew he was right. And the terrifying part was, for the first time, I was beginning to imagine a life that didn't revolve around Adrian. The days after that breakfast passed like a blur, but something inside me had shifted. I stopped waiting. For months, I had lived in constant hope, hoping Adrian would come home early, hoping he would look at me with something other than indifference, hoping Selene would vanish as suddenly as she had appeared. But now, I was done. I woke early one morning, sunlight spilling across the cold side of the bed that Adrian hadn't touched. Normally, that emptiness would have stung, but this time, I didn't feel sorrow. I felt freedom. I slipped out of bed, tied a scarf around my hair, and walked to the garden barefoot, savoring the cool dew on the grass. For once, I wasn't thinking about where Adrian was or what he was doing. I was thinking about me. It was there Damon found me. "Look at you," he teased, his voice warm. "The runaway queen." I turned, startled. He stood in the doorway, his shirt half buttoned, his hair as unruly as ever. Yet his eyes, they were steady, watching me in a way that made my stomach flutter. "I'm not running," I said softly. "Aren't you?" He stepped closer, his hands in his pockets. "Every time I see you now, you're different. Like you're slipping out of his shadow." "Maybe I am." The words escaped before I could stop them. He smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Good. You deserve the sun, Elena." That morning, we walked together among the roses. He made jokes about how the Reinhardts wasted fortunes on flowers that didn't even smell sweet, and I laughed more than I had in months. The sound felt foreign, but it loosened something in my chest. For a while, I allowed myself to forget the cruelty of Adrian's indifference, the sharp sting of Selene's smirks, to forget that technically, I was still Adrian's wife, but reality had a way of crashing in. That evening, Adrian returned earlier than usual. His sharp eyes found me in the living room, where Damon was teaching me how to play some ridiculous card game. For the first time in months, I was smiling. Adrian's jaw tightened. "Damon," he said coldly, "don't you have better things to do than waste time with my wife?" The warmth drained from the room. Damon, unbothered, leaned back in his chair. "Not really." "Why? You want to join?" Adrian's gaze cut to me, sharp as glass. "Elena." A word. My stomach knotted, but I stood and followed him into his study. The door closed behind us with a finality that made my skin prickle. He turned on me, his expression unreadable. "What do you think you're doing?" "Playing cards," I said evenly. "Don't play games with me," he snapped. "I saw you laughing with him like." His words trailed off, but the fury in his eyes spoke volumes. I forced myself to meet his gaze. "Like what, Adrian?" "Like a wife who isn't invisible." His nostrils flared. "You're my wife. Mine. Don't forget that." The cruelty wasn't in the words themselves, it was in the way he said them. Not with love. Not with longing. With possession. Something inside me hardened. "Then maybe you should start treating me like one." The silence that followed was suffocating. His eyes darkened, and for a moment, I thought he might strike me. But instead, he turned away, his hands clenched in two fists. "Stay away from Damon," he muttered. "Whatever's going on in that foolish head of his, it ends now." I swallowed, my voice low. "Funny. You never cared who I stayed close to before. Only when it's him." His shoulders tensed, but he said nothing more. That night, I didn't cry. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, realizing with startling clarity that Adrian would never change. He could take Selene to every gala, whisper sweet nothings in her ear, and still, he would never let me go. Not because he loved me, but because he needed ownership. I needed escape. The first step came in small acts of rebellion. I stopped waiting for him at dinner. I stopped wearing the jewelry he bought to parade me like an ornament. Instead, I read books late into the night, cooked simple meals with Marjorie in the kitchen, even went on long drives by myself. And Damon was always there, lingering in the background, offering quiet companionship without demanding anything in return. Sometimes he teased, sometimes he listened, sometimes he just sat with me in silence. Selene noticed first. It was at a charity gala. Adrian dragged me to more for appearances than affection. Selene was there, as always, draped in a glittering gown, her hand sliding too casually over Adrian's arm. But her eyes, they flickered toward Damon and me, narrowed, calculating. When Adrian stepped away to speak with a senator, Selene leaned close, her voice like venom. "You're getting bold, Elena," she whispered, "parading around with Damon like some lovesick girl. Do you think anyone believes it? Do you think he'll actually choose you?" I stiffened, my fingers tightening around my glass. "Why does it bother you?" Her lips curled into a cruel smile. "Because Adrian doesn't share what's his. And if you think Damon will protect you from that, you're even more naive than I thought." I turned to her, my voice steady, despite the pounding of my heart. "Maybe I don't need protection. Maybe I just need to stop letting him break me." For the first time, Selene's smirk faltered. Just slightly. But it was enough. That night, as I sat in the back seat of the car with Adrian and Selene whispering in the front, I realized something. I wasn't afraid anymore. Adrian's cruelty had once defined me. Selene's taunts had once cut me to pieces. But now there was a part of me that felt alive again. A part that laughed in the garden with Damon, that dared to push back against Adrian's control, that dreamed of something more than just surviving. And once that part had awakened, there was no putting it back to sleep. I used to believe that love was supposed to be a safe haven, a place where your heart could rest. But with Adrian, it was like being caught in a storm, every wave crashing harder than the last, every gust of wind cutting me deeper. He loved his mistress more than he could ever love me, and no matter how much I gave, I was always the shadow in someone else's story. But Ethan was different. One evening, after another argument with Adrian, this time because I dared to question why his mistress had worn the necklace he once promised to give me, I found myself wandering through the garden, trying to catch my breath. My eyes stuck with unshed tears, my chest tight with suffocating weight. Ethan appeared out of the darkness, leaning casually against a stone pillar. But his eyes weren't casual at all. They were sharp, observant, filled with something unspoken. "You Don't have to keep breaking yourself for him, you know, he said softly, his voice almost a whisper carried by the night breeze. I froze, startled. What are you talking about? He smirked slightly, but there was no humor in it. I see the way you look at him, like he's your whole world. But I also see the way he looks at her, like you're invisible. The words stung because they were true. I turned away, not wanting him to see the dares, threatening to fall. It's not your business, Ethan. Stay out of it. But Ethan stepped closer, his voice loud now, almost a growl. It became my business the moment I realized you were breaking for a man who would never bleed for you. My heart raced. No one had ever said it so bluntly. No one had dared to stand up to Adrian, not even me. For a long moment, silence stretched between us. The only sound was the rustling of leaves in the night air. Finally, Ethan sighed, softer this time. I don't know what game Adrian is playing, but if you keep letting him treat you this way, you'll lose yourself completely. And you don't deserve that, Maya. My breath caught. He had used my name, not coldly, not dismissively, but with a gentleness I hadn't felt in so long. That night, I lay awake in bed. Adrian sighed empty again. My mind wouldn't stop replaying Ethan's words. His eyes, so intense, so unflinchingly honest, had looked straight through me, seeing the woman even I had forgotten I was. The next few days blurred together. Adrian was absent more often than not, rumors swirling about him and his mistress attending events together. And every time I caught sight of Ethan, he seemed to hover near me, not intrusively, but protectively, as though silently daring the world to break me any further. Then came the night of the gala. Adrian was supposed to take me. But when I walked into the room, ready, hopeful, dressed in the gown I had spent weeks perfecting, he barely glanced at me. His eyes swept past me to his mistress, draped in scarlet silk, and without hesitation, he extended his arm to her instead. In front of everyone. The whispers were deafening, each one like a dagger to my chest. My hands trembled as I tried to steady myself, but before the shame could fully consume me, Ethan appeared. He didn't say a word. He simply offered his arm, his expression calm, as though this were the most natural thing in the world. The room grew silent as eyes shifted from Adrian, flaunting his mistress, to Ethan, guiding me with quiet dignity. I hesitated, my heart pounding, but when Ethan's gaze met mine, steady and unshaken, I placed my hand on his arm. And for the first time in years, I felt seen. Later that night, when the gala lights dimmed and the music slowed, Ethan leaned close, his voice brushing against my ear. You don't need him, Maya. You've been waiting for love in the wrong place all along. The words unsettled me, stirred something deep inside me, but with them came fear, confusion, and a dangerous realization, because for the first time, I was starting to wonder if Ethan might be right, and that terrified me more than Adrian's cruelty ever had. I thought things would get easier once I put some distance between myself and Adrian, but life has a cruel sense of humor. No matter how far I walked away, he had a way of finding me, or maybe fate had a way of throwing me back into his orbit. One afternoon, Mia dragged me out of the apartment. You've been brooding long enough, she said, linking her arm with mine. We're going shopping. I barely had the energy to protest, so I let her. The streets were lined with boutiques, the kind of places I once would have only admired from a distance. But Mia, bold as always, pulled me straight inside. The air smelled faintly of roses and new fabric. Rows of gowns shimmered under the soft light, delicate lace brushing against silk as I walked by. And then my heart stopped. Because standing there, with his hand resting possessively on her lower back, was Adrian. And beside him, Lily, his so-called mistress, the woman he'd once chosen over me. But what cut deeper wasn't just seeing them together, it was what they were doing. Lily was trying on wedding dresses. The consultant held up a shimmering white gown, and Lily twirled in front of the mirror, her face glowing. Adrian watched her, eyes warm, lips curved in a way I had once believed was reserved for me. My throat tightened. My stomach dropped. It felt like someone had reached into my chest and squeezed my heart until it cracked. Mia immediately noticed. "Oh my God, Nina." She tried to turn me around, but I was rooted in place. Adrian's eyes flicked up, and for a brief moment, they locked with mine in the mirror. His smile faltered. His jaw tightened. But he didn't move. He didn't call out. He didn't chase me. He just stood there, letting me drown in the sight of what could have been mine. I forced my lips into a smile, though my hands trembled at my sides. "Congratulations," I whispered under my breath, too low for him to hear. Then I turned sharply and walked out of the boutique, my chest heaving like I had just run a marathon. Mia followed close behind, her arm wrapping around my shoulders. "Don't you dare cry for him, Nina. He's not worth it." But tears already burned my eyes. It wasn't just heartbreak anymore, it was humiliation. It was betrayal. It was watching him dress up his cruelty as love for another woman. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. Adrian wasn't mine anymore. Maybe he never truly had been. And yet, the pain of seeing him with her sliced deeper than any blade could. But as I stared into the darkness, something shifted in me. Maybe fate had given me this scene not to torment me, but to push me to finally let go. If Adrian had chosen Lily, then so be it. I wouldn't fight for scraps of love anymore. I wouldn't beg for the attention of a man who had already written me out of his future. My heart ached, but beneath that ache was the flicker of something stronger. Resolve. The next morning, when Aiden came to pick me up for work, I smiled at him in a way I hadn't before. He blinked, taken aback, then smiled back, softer than the sun's first light. Maybe, just maybe, his careless warmth was exactly what I needed to heal. And as I stepped into his car, I promised myself one thing: Adrian may have shattered me, but he would not define me. I had thought my heart couldn't break any more than it already had. But sitting there in Daniel's cozy living room, sipping coffee while his eyes lingered on me with something more than brotherly affection, I realized I was standing on a cliff's edge. If I leaned forward, I'd fall into Daniel's arms, safe, warm, wanted. If I stepped back, I'd return to Adrian's cold world, cruel, controlling, unyielding. But the strangest part, Adrian wasn't letting go. The first real storm hit one evening when Daniel drove me home after a late-night work session. The car stopped outside the house, rain hammering the windshield. I turned to him, thanking him for dinner and the company. He smiled, that gentle, patient smile, and for a fleeting second, I thought he might lean in. Instead, the front door burst open. Adrian stood there, his tall frame filling the doorway, his eyes like fire in the stormlight. "Out!" he barked. His voice cut through the rain. Daniel sighed but didn't flinch. "Adrian, it's late. Don't start this." Adrian's gaze shot to me. Inside. Now, something inside me, the part that had endured years of being ordered around, nearly obeyed on instinct. But Daniel's hand rested lightly on the steering wheel, steady, grounding me. "Adrian, she's not your possession," Daniel said quietly. "You don't get to control her anymore." The storm raged louder, but inside the car, time froze. My heart pounded. I wanted to scream, to finally throw everything back at Adrian, but my voice cracked when I whispered, "You don't love me. You never did. You loved her. Always her." For the first time in years, I saw him falter. His jaw clenched, his nostrils flared, but his eyes. There was something there. Something like panic. "She's gone," he muttered, almost too low for me to hear. And his words stopped, as if he couldn't bring himself to finish. The silence was unbearable. Finally, Daniel leaned closer, his voice steady but firm. "She deserves better. She deserves freedom." I thought Adrian would explode. But instead, he turned away, retreating into the dark house, leaving the door swinging open. That night, I didn't sleep. My mind spun with questions. Why now? Why, after years of cruelty and indifference, was Adrian suddenly acting as though I mattered? Was it jealousy, possessiveness, or something deeper he'd buried beneath his obsession with his mistress? And why? Why did my heart still react to him? Days blurred into weeks. Daniel and I grew closer, almost inseparable. He didn't push. He simply showed up, offered support, and listened when the memories became too heavy. His kindness was a balm, stitching up wounds I thought would never close. But Adrian was everywhere. His shadow lingered in hallways, in whispered phone calls, in the way he watched me when he thought I wasn't looking. At work meetings, he acted distant and professional. But the moment we were alone, the mask slipped. One afternoon, he cornered me in the elevator. "You think he'll save you?" he asked, his voice low, dangerously calm. My hands clenched around my bag strap. "He doesn't need to save me. He just doesn't hurt me." Adrian's eyes narrowed. His lips parted as though to argue, but then he leaned closer, so close I could feel the heat of his breath. "You don't understand," he whispered. "You've never understood." The doors dinged open, and I escaped before he could say more. But my chest was tight. His words echoed in my mind. Never understood what? The twist came on a quiet Saturday evening. Danielle and I had spent the day at a park, laughing, letting the sun wash away the heaviness of the past. For the first time, I felt light, almost hopeful. When he walked me to my door, he hesitated, then gently took my hand. "Can I ask you something?" he said. My heart raced. Of course, why him? All those years. Why did you stay? His eyes searched mine, not with judgment, but with pain. The answer slipped out before I could stop it. Because when we first met, I thought he loved me. And by the time I realized the truth, I was too broken to leave. Daniel's grip tightened slightly. "You're not broken, Claire. You're stronger than you know. And I can love you the way you deserve." My chest ached, but in the most confusing way. I wanted to fall into him, to let his words heal me completely. But then, as if fate had timed it cruelly, Adrian's voice shattered the night. "You think you can replace me?" He stood a few feet away, his eyes wild, his fists clenched. For the first time, he looked less like the untouchable, cruel man I had endured, and more like someone unraveling. Daniel stepped protectively in front of me. "This isn't about you anymore, Adrian." But Adrian wasn't looking at him. His gaze burned into mine, desperate, furious, and terrifying all at once. "You'll never understand what you mean to me," he said. And in that moment, I realized this story wasn't just about escaping cruelty. It was about uncovering truths buried under years of lies, pain, and misplaced love. But was I ready to hear his truth? Or would it shatter me all over again? I thought I had built a wall around myself strong enough to keep Lucien out. But the truth, his presence chipped at it with every encounter, every word that dripped with sincerity instead of malice. He was nothing like Adrian. Where Adrian burned with a cruel, consuming fire, Lucien warmed like sunlight through the curtains, soft, patient, undeniable. And yet, my heart was not so easily convinced. One evening, I returned home from work late. The weight of the day pressing heavily on me, I pushed open the door to find the living room bathed in warm light. Lucien stood by the dining table, sleeves rolled up, hair slightly damp, as though he had just showered, arranging a simple meal. The aroma of roasted chicken, herbs, and warm bread filled the air. "You're home," he said, smiling gently, as if he had been waiting just for me. For a moment, I froze in the doorway. No one had ever done this for me before, not Adrian. Not anyone. Meals with Adrian had always been about show, expensive restaurants, flashing cameras, an audience to admire him. But here, it was just Lucien and me, with a table set for two in quiet simplicity. I sat down slowly, my hands fidgeting. "You cooked," he chuckled softly, sliding a plate toward me. "Don't sound so surprised. I'm not completely useless in the kitchen." His eyes softened. "You've been running on fumes. I thought you deserved a night where someone else takes care of you." Something inside me cracked. For so long, I had fought for scraps of affection from Adrian, tolerated his cruelty because I believed that was the price of love. But here was Lucien, giving freely, without conditions, without expecting me to beg, and that terrified me more than Adrian's cruelty ever had. I ate in silence, every bite warm, comforting, filling places in me I didn't know were empty. When I finally set my fork down, Lucien leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. His voice was quiet but steady. "Why do you keep punishing yourself by comparing me to him?" he asked gently. "I know you still think of him. I can see it in your eyes. But you don't have to fight alone anymore, you know." His words pierced through me. My throat tightened. "I don't want to depend on anyone anymore," I whispered, staring at the table. "Every time I trusted Adrian. Every time I believed he might choose me. He broke me. And now, I don't even know who I am without all that pain." Lucien didn't flinch. He didn't push. He simply reached out and placed his hand gently over mine. His touch was grounding, not demanding. "You're more than what he made you feel," he said. "You're stronger than the shadow he cast. And if you'll let me, I'll prove it to you, not by replacing him, not by forcing myself into your heart, but by standing with you until you finally see yourself the way I already do." My heart ached at his words. I pulled my hand back, not because I didn't want his touch, but because I did. "Too much. I can't promise you anything," I admitted, my voice trembling. "I don't even know if I can love again. Not properly." Lucien's gaze softened even more, and a faint, almost sad smile touched his lips. "Then don't promise me. Just let me be here. That's enough." His patience scared me more than Adrian's cruelty ever had. Because if Adrian's love had been a storm that tore me apart, Lucien's was a steady river, one that could drown me in its depth if I wasn't careful. But still, I couldn't ignore that tiny spark flickering inside me. The one whispering that maybe, just maybe, this time, things could be different. And yet, life has a cruel way of testing fragile hopes. A week later, I ran into Adrian again. It happened at a charity gala, ironically, one Lucien had been invited to as well. I wore a simple navy dress, understated, yet elegant. Lucien had offered me his arm, and though I hesitated, I accepted. For the first time in months, I walked into a room without shame, without the invisible weight of Adrian's shadow pressing down on me. But the moment his eyes landed on me across the room, I felt it, the shift, the fire. Adrian looked shocked, almost furious, as though the sight of me standing beside Lucian, unbroken, smiling faintly, was the greatest betrayal he could imagine. He approached us, his mistress trailing behind him in a dress that glittered like starlight. But his eyes never left me. Interesting, he drawled, his voice smooth yet sharp. So this is what you've been doing, brother? Collecting my leftovers? Lucian stiffened, but before he could respond, I did. No, I said firmly, my voice steady despite the tremor inside me. I chose him because, unlike you, he sees me. The room seemed to freeze. Adrian's jaw tightened, his mask cracking for the briefest second. And for the first time in years, I didn't shrink beneath his gaze. I stood taller, stronger, because in that moment, I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. I used to think I was made of glass, that every blow, every betrayal, every cruel whisper from Adrian would crack me open until nothing was left. But with Daniel by my side, I began to realize I wasn't glass at all. I was steel that had been hammered in fire. Life didn't stop throwing challenges my way, but now, instead of feeling crushed beneath them, I faced them with a strange new resilience. Adrian hadn't left us alone. Of course he hadn't. His ego was too inflated, his need for control too consuming. Even as I built a new life with Daniel, he found ways to insert himself, to remind me that in his eyes, I would always be his possession. One afternoon, as I was organizing a charity event Daniel and I had agreed to sponsor, Adrian showed up. I saw him the moment he walked into the venue, polished suit, arrogant smirk, the kind of presence that made the air heavier. But instead of my stomach twisting in knots as it once did, I stood taller. Lila, he greeted smoothly, like we were old friends. I hear you're keeping busy. Charity work, of all things. That doesn't quite suit you. I met his gaze steadily. No, Adrian, it doesn't suit the woman you thought I was, but it suits the woman I've become. The flicker of irritation in his eyes was small, but I caught it. For the first time, I realized I held some power over him, not because I wanted revenge, but because my indifference unsettled him. Later that night, I told Daniel what had happened. His jaw tightened, but instead of flying into protective rage, he simply took my hand. He doesn't deserve a single thought from you, Daniel murmured. And if he ever crosses a line, he'll regret it. It wasn't an empty threat. I could hear the steel in his tone. But life wasn't just about surviving Adrian. It was about building something beyond him. And that's what Daniel and I worked on. We decorated the new house with small touches that reflected as the soft beige throw blanket I loved, the shelves lined with Daniel's books, the vase of fresh flowers he always made sure was on the kitchen counter because he knew they made me smile. At first, it felt surreal. Happiness had been a stranger for so long that I wasn't sure I trusted it. I would wake in the middle of the night, heart racing, afraid it would all vanish. But every time, Daniel was there breathing steadily beside me, his arm draped over my waist, grounding me. Still, there was something I hadn't told him. A secret I carried quietly, unsure how it might shift the fragile peace we had built. I was late in a way that made me pause at every calendar, every symptom. My heart thundered each time I considered the possibility. Could it be? At first, I didn't believe it. I told myself it was stress, that my body was simply adjusting after years of emotional turmoil. But when I finally stood in the small bathroom, Tast clutched in trembling hands. The truth stared back at me into unmistakable lines. Pregnant. I sat on the edge of the tub, stunned. Joy and fear tangled inside me, choking me. Daniel had always been so gentle, so steady. But what if this was too much? What if my past with Adrian, the chaos of it all, poisoned the idea of a family before it could even begin? For days, I kept it to myself. I watched Daniel cook us dinner, tease me over little things, kiss my forehead before bed, and I stayed silent. But silence never lasts. One evening, as we sat on the porch, the setting sun painting the sky in streaks of orange and pink, the words slipped out before I could stop them. Daniel, I need to tell you something. He turned to me, eyes soft but curious. What is it, Lila? I took a shaky breath, my hands clutching the hem of my dress. I'm pregnant. The silence that followed was deafening. My heart pounded as I searched his face, bracing for hesitation, for doubt, for anything that would confirm my deepest fears. Instead, Daniel's eyes widened, first in shock, then in something so tender it made my throat tighten. Slowly, his lips curved into a smile, and he reached for my hand. You mean we're going to have a baby? Tears filled my eyes as I nodded. Yes. I wasn't sure how you'd feel about it. He laughed softly, pulling me into his arms. Lila, this is the best news I've ever heard. I didn't think it was possible to love you more, but somehow I do. For the first time in years, Joy didn't feel like a stranger. It felt like home, but deep down, I knew Adrian wouldn't let this go. If he couldn't control me, he might try to control the family I was building, and that thought, more than anything, steeled my resolve. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about the life growing inside me, the future I was determined to protect. And no matter what storm Adrian tried to summon, I wouldn't bend this time. I had Daniel. I had love. And soon, we would have something even greater, a family. And that was worth fighting for. The weeks that followed were bittersweet. I floated on a cloud of excitement over the pregnancy, yet the shadow of Adrian's presence lingered, like a storm threatening to break. He didn't contact me directly, but the whispers and subtle manipulations began, calls to my workplace, veiled threats through his social circle, and carefully orchestrated coincidences meant to unsettle me. Daniel noticed immediately. He stood beside me, unshaken, but I could see the tension tightening around his eyes. He never let it show to the outside world, but at home he allowed himself to worry. One night, after a long day of preparing the nursery, we sat together on the porch, the wind whispering through the trees. I felt the baby kick for the first time, a tiny pulse of life that made everything else fade away except the fear gnawing at the edges of my joy. Do you think he'll really leave us alone? I asked quietly, resting my hand on my stomach. Daniel's gaze softened. He doesn't matter anymore. He's a storm. Yes, but storms pass, and we'll be standing here together when it does. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. And yet, deep down, I knew Adrian wasn't done. It all came to a head one rainy afternoon. I had gone to pick up supplies for the nursery, and Daniel was still at work. I navigated the slick streets, hands gripping the steering wheel tightly, when I saw a familiar black car pull up beside mine. Adrian. Before I could react, he was at my window. Rain dripped from his hair onto the glass as he leaned in, eyes blazing. Claire, he said, his voice low and dangerous. We need to talk. I don't think so, I said, my voice steady, though my heart raced. You don't understand, he pressed. I can't. I won't let this happen. Not like this. I don't know what you think you can do anymore, Adrian, I said, trying to keep my fear from showing. I've moved on. I'm with Daniel. And soon, I'll have a family. You don't get to control that. His jaw clenched. You think you can just walk away? That I'll watch you take everything we had? I never had you, I shot back, the words sharper than I intended. Not really. And I never will again. For a moment, he just stared at me, rain sliding down his face, eyes wild. Then, finally, he turned and walked back to his car, slamming the door with a force that rattled the windows. The encounter left me shaken, but also resolute. I was no longer the timid, broken woman who had cowered at his presence. I had a life, a love, and soon a child. And nothing he could do would take that away. When I got home, Daniel was waiting, worry etched on his face. I told him everything, from the tense encounter to the subtle threats I had sensed over the past weeks. He held me close, pressing his forehead to mine. We'll get through this, he whispered, together. And in that moment, I realized something. Adrian had spent years trying to break me, to twist my life into his image of control and obsession. But in doing so, he had created the very thing he feared the most, a woman who could stand on her own, who could love without fear, who could protect the life growing inside her with unflinching determination. The storm wasn't over. I knew that. But for the first time, I also knew that we were stronger than the storm itself, because love, real, patient, steadfast love, was standing right beside me. And no matter how hard Adrian tried, he would never take that away. The tension had been building for months, each day a careful balancing act between joy and fear. I could feel the baby growing inside me, each tiny movement a reminder of the life I was protecting and the future I was finally choosing for myself. Daniel never left my side, and together we fortified our little world, a sanctuary against Adrian's relentless storm. But storms have a way of finding cracks, and Adrian, he had one final card to play. It was a crisp Saturday morning when it happened. I had just finished arranging the baby's room, the walls painted a soft pastel, shelves lined with toys and books I had picked myself. Daniel was downstairs, prepping lunch, humming softly to himself. I could hear the laughter in his voice, and my heart swelled with warmth. Then the phone rang. The number was blocked. My stomach twisted, but I answered. Claire, Adrian's voice slithered through the line. Calm, controlled, but underneath it, I could hear the edges of desperation. We need to meet. Alone, I felt the old panic rise, the one I had fought so hard to suppress. But this time, I refused to succumb. I can't do that, Adrian, I said firmly. I have a life now. I have Daniel. And I have a child to protect. Whatever you think you can say, it won't change that. There was a pause, and for the first time, I heard the faintest crack in his armor. You don't understand, he whispered, almost to himself. I can't lose you. I swallowed hard, heart racing. You already lost me, Adrian. Years ago, you chose her. And I chose myself. I chose Daniel. He hung up. Later that evening, there was a knock at the door. My heart skipped a beat. Daniel opened it cautiously, and there, standing on the porch, drenched and desperate, was Adrian. I can't let it end like this, he said, voice raw, stripped of the arrogance that had once defined him. I thought I could control it, control you, but seeing you with him, and now with a child, I can't. I stepped forward, calm but resolute. Adrian, it's over. I'm not yours. I never was. And nothing you do can change that. For a long moment, he just stared at me, rain dripping from his hair, eyes wild and haunted. Then, as if finally accepting reality, he exhaled sharply, his shoulders sagging. I'm sorry, he whispered. For everything. For all the pain I caused. I save it. I interrupted, my voice steady. You made your choices. I made mine. Now leave us alone, Adrian. For good, he hesitated, searching my face for something pity, forgiveness, maybe even the spark he had once mistaken for love. But there was nothing left for him to grasp. Finally, he nodded once, turning away, disappearing into the night. The next few weeks were quiet, peaceful, and for the first time, I felt free. Free to laugh without fear, to love without restraint, to prepare for the child growing inside me without looking over my shoulder. Daniel was unwavering. He helped me paint the nursery, assembled the crib, even sang to the baby when I was too tired to keep my eyes open. Each small moment reinforced what I had fought so hard to believe. Love didn't have to hurt. Love didn't have to destroy. And then, on a calm, golden morning, it happened. The labor was long, exhausting, and terrifying, but Daniel was there every step of the way, holding my hand, whispering encouragement, steady and strong. When the cries finally pierced the air, announcing the arrival of our daughter, my heart shattered into pieces only to be rebuilt, stronger and fuller than it had ever been. She was perfect. Tiny fingers, soft hair, eyes that seemed to hold the promise of a future we had fought so hard to earn. And as I held her close, Daniel at my side, I realized something profound. The life we had built, the love we had nurtured, was unshakable. Adrian's shadow no longer haunted us. He had been a storm I survived, a storm that had tested the limits of my heart. But storms pass. And when they do, what truly remains is love. I looked at Daniel, then at our daughter, and whispered softly, tears of joy and relief streaming down my face. This is our life now, and nothing can take it away. For the first time in years, I was truly, completely free. The first morning after the birth was quiet. Golden sunlight spilled through the nursery window, dust motes floating lazily in the air. I sat in the rocking chair, our daughter cradled against my chest, her tiny breaths warm and steady. Daniel leaned against the doorway, cup of coffee in hand, eyes soft, filled with a love I could finally trust without fear. I still can't believe she's here, I whispered, fingers tracing her tiny cheek. Daniel smiled, stepping closer. Neither can I. But she's perfect. Just like you said she would be. I laughed softly, a sound I hadn't realized I'd been missing from myself. Perfect. Yes, she is. And she's ours. All ours. It was strange to think back to the years I had spent under Adrian's shadow, the cruelty, the heartbreak, the constant fear that my love would never be returned. Those memories still existed, etched into the fabric of who I was. But they no longer had power over me. They were part of my story, yes, but not the story itself. The real story was happening now, right here, with Daniel, with our daughter, with the life we had chosen for ourselves. Weeks passed. Adrian never contacted me again. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he had moved abroad, attempting to escape the mess of his past, but I didn't care. He had no place in this new chapter. Daniel and I settled into a rhythm of family life. Simple moments became treasures. Bedtime stories whispered in soft tones, morning walks through the park, quiet evenings with our daughter nestled between us on the couch. Every smile, every laugh, every milestone reminded me of how far I had come. I had loved once. I had been hurt once. And I had survived. But I had also learned the most important lesson. Love could be gentle. Love could be patient. Love could nurture instead of consume. And when you found it, when you finally let yourself believe it, it could rebuild everything that had once been broken. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, Danielle and I sat together on the porch, our daughter sleeping peacefully in her crib inside. Do you ever think about how different things might have been? I asked quietly, tracing patterns in the wooden railing. Daniel tilted his head, a small smile tugging at his lips. Sometimes. But then I remember that every wrong turn, every heartbreak, it led us here, to this moment. And I wouldn't trade it for anything. I leaned against him, resting my head on his shoulder, feeling the steady rise and fall of his chest. Me neither, I said softly, and for the first time in my life, I believed it fully. Life wasn't perfect, no story ever truly is. But it was ours, and that made all the difference. We had survived the storms, endured the heartbreak, and emerged on the other side stronger, wiser, and more in love than I had ever thought possible. And as I watched our daughter stir, tiny fingers reaching out for the world she had just entered, I whispered a promise I knew I would always keep. This life, this love, we will protect it. Always. Because in the end, that was the only story that truly mattered, the one we chose to write ourselves, and that was the story of betrayal, heartbreak, and rebirth. When Leo chose to protect Nancy while Elia burned with fever, he never imagined she would one day rise stronger, freer, and untouchable. His regret became his shadow while Elia walked into her brightest future without ever looking back. Sometimes love isn't about holding on, it's about letting go. Even if it means leaving behind those who once defined your world. So remember, never give all of yourself to someone who wouldn't do the same for you. True love doesn't demand your suffering, it celebrates your worth. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If Lia's journey moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more heart-touching love stories. Until next time, cherish those who choose you, and never be afraid to choose yourself.